Hello there, this is Leo Waldock for Kit Guru. This is Luke Hill, our CPU chap. Hello, Luke.
Hello.
There we go. First time on camera. We're going to have a discussion about a few different subjects. Let's kick off with the most interesting thing. The topic of the day is Samsung going to buy AMD? Now this is where we're into rampant speculation because frankly I have no idea apart from the fact it sounds plausible. I quite like the idea if I'm entirely honest. I hate the idea that AMD is this sort of weakling that's got a tiny fraction of the market, Intel being the beast of the market, 90 I don't know what percent of the x86 market. If you say processors in general, washing machines, phones and so on, actually Intel's quite puny, oddly enough. But if we're dealing with PCs, laptops and x86 kit and maybe stretch it to servers. Luke, let's have some speculation. Samsung, AMD, do you like it? What do you think?
Well, I think it could be a good idea. It could be good for both parties, I think. We've seen AMD is struggling on the enthusiast front. They have been for a few years. Intel are, in some respects, leaps and bounds ahead with their high performance, their enthusiast grade kit. So I think if we see some competitive company like Samsung, who have stamped their foot into a number of markets and shown good competition, shown they can compete with the likes of Intel and ARM and other guys, then I think this could be good for all parties and especially us enthusiasts.
Right, do you see, now I mean let's not get into the do we like certain companies or not thing because that's very dodgy territory, but I mean I have my strong views on pretty much every company in the market. There's obviously we've got your Samsungs, whereas you mentioned ARM there, of course ARM isn't a company as such, is it? It's a design house, which right, then, yeah. and as we know every phone I can think of uses ARM, apart from there are one or two tablety kinds of things that use atomy sorts of...
Yeah, we've seen some of the Acer and Asus phones use...
Indeed. And then Apple uses Apple's own these days, of course, doesn't it? And they're genuinely Apple owned rather than rebranded and such like. They have their own fab these days. But if we go back to the desktop side of things, I mean, basically, where at the minute is AMD's strength, if it has one, in the processor market?
Well, I think the APUs, they are a strength. We might not see them as a strength as enthusiasts and gamers, but for perhaps your grandma's PC, somebody who wants good performance and just web browsing and things like that, then the APUs, they are decent chips.
I like Kaveri, I like the FM2 stock bus. However, in a sense, it's too much for your grandma. This is actually the irony of it. It sits somewhere between the two. It's good for a desktop system, but it's got that 95 watt TDP thing. Whereas if Kaveri was 35 watts, so it'd be in a tiny little box, it'd be great. But at 95 watts, it actually requires a proper PC tower.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I think the 7850K, the higher end chip, is perhaps far away from your grandmother's PC, we can say that. But some of the lower powered chips, you do see those in stock in the likes of PC World and Currys, which is usually, shall we say, your grandma's PC, let's call it that. But I think some of the solutions, like the 7850K, is actually a good stopgap solution. So if you've got students or younger people who perhaps are waiting for an upgrade but want to buy their kit now, and they want to upgrade their graphics card in, say, 6 months' time when something new comes out, when they have a birthday, when they have Christmas, then I think the graphics chip on Kaveri actually is rather useful for 6 months' worth of HD gaming.
I completely agree. I mean, they fall in that middle ground, but then it's almost like a crevasse in the market in a way. It's like not one thing, not the other.
Yeah, it's kind of a jack of both trades, but master of none almost.
Now, the conspiracy theories or rumours go on to say that obviously AMD has a portfolio of patents, and they had the whole thing with Intel a few years ago when they had legal stuff going from here and back again. But as I understand it, the patents basically say, the intellectual property says that AMD can't sell it on. On the other hand, were Samsung to buy AMD and Intel said, well, that's just scrapped all your intellectual property, that would mean that Intel would actually be the market, which seems legally problematic.
Yeah, that's worrying for everybody. Especially the Monopolies Commission, I guess.
So look, just predict the next 5 years.
I wish.
So if Samsung were to buy AMD outright, and I don't know whether they stand with Global Foundries or if that's a whole separate, or whether they care, or let's put that to one side. Let's say they did, let's say they got all the IP that AMD currently owns, and they were in a position to do something with it. does Samsung want to make x86 stuff, or would it be laptopy stuff, or PC, or where would their interest be?
I think that is an interesting question, because at this current point in time, you'd almost think, well, why would you try to compete with Intel when they're so aggressive in their marketing strategies and so respected, shall we say, by enthusiasts and by industry? And it is genuinely good kit. I mean, these Xeons are obviously going very well in industry. The Haswell and Haswell E-chips are performing well on the enthusiast market. Everybody seems to like them. So it's a question of why would Samsung want to get involved in that? But I don't think we can underestimate the power of Samsung. I think we know that Samsung's a big company. They've come in, they went into the SSD market very aggressively, and they took that by storm a few generations ago. They produce everything in-house. So I think they do have the capacity and the capabilities, and I definitely would not rule them out of competing on the markets that we would not necessarily say that's a smart move.
I have to confess, my take on it is similar to that, but there's also the view that Samsung came into smartphones. As we know, Android dominates the smartphone market. I figure it is 80-something percent, 83% of the iPhone is about 15-16%, which suggests that Windows is about 1 or 2% possibly. I don't think count BlackBerry smartphone actually, but that's just being rude, but it's the truth of it. And that's the smartphone market in one. Now, however, Samsung has actually been having problems. They were the dominant player. I believe they still are the dominant player, but the Chinese are coming up hard behind. Companies we've never heard of in the UK are now getting big in the smartphone market. And in a sense, Samsung, obviously they have the hardware advantage, but with Android they have no advantage whatsoever. When you go on to PCs and such like, well, if they've got the intellectual property that other companies don't have, the Chinese can't make x86, or not in the same way. So I just wonder if Samsung thinks, if we do this, we buy an advantage in this area. We can't beat Intel, I don't think, but no one else can come along behind us.
I think that's an interesting point, actually, yes. I mean, there is the option to say, yes, we can't compete with Intel, but we can gather up everything else, which might be a sizable proportion of the market, maybe big money for Samsung. Obviously, that's what it comes down to at the end of the day, is money, after all. So I think that does raise an interesting point. We've seen that Intel is getting some competitions on some of the other markets. So, for example, the server market's going with some different designs compared to the Intel Xeon. So there is room for the emerging markets and the new technologies and perhaps the new applications that are coming through, where Samsung could possibly compete and could possibly see a niche in the market where the IP from AMD may help in that respect.
Got you. So at the moment, pure speculation on our part. I don't think we're going to rule it out. It doesn't seem impossible to us.
I think the rumours seem they seem founded. They seem legitimate, should we say, and they seem like it could be a good move. It doesn't seem senseless by any stretch of the imagination, no.
No, indeed, that's very diplomatically put. More diplomatic than I. Right, so that's our views on Samsung possibly buying AMD. We think that one sounds like a plausible rumour. If it happens, interesting. And let's face it, AMD's been on its knees for years. So any change in that respect has to be a change for the better. And if it gives AMD a boost, I think we like that, don't we?
Fantastic for everybody, I think.
Terrific.
Competition is healthy.
Yes, lovely.
That's the key thing.